Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us. What if I told you that one of the largest explosions in human history didn't happen in a war zone, but on a secret Soviet launch pad? An explosion so massive it rivaled the power of a small nuclear bomb. Yet for decades, almost no one outside the USSR even knew it had happened. Today, we're peeling back the Iron Curtain to reveal a disaster so catastrophic it erased years of work, consumed billions in resources, and crushed the Soviet dream of beating America to the moon. This isn't just a story about a rocket, it's about ambition, secrecy, and the moment human dreams quite literally went up in flames. The story of the Soviet N-1 rocket is woven into the fabric of one of humanity's greatest quests, the race to the moon. As the 1960s unfolded, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was fought not only on Earth, but also in the heavens above. After the Soviet Union's groundbreaking launch of Sputnik in 1957 and the historic flight of Yuri Gagarin in 1961, the first human to orbit the Earth, there was a palpable confidence that the Soviets might be the first to land a man on the moon. However, the path from Earth's orbit to the lunar surface was far from simple. It demanded unprecedented technological innovation, unyielding determination, and a complex web of political will. The N-1 rocket emerged from this environment of fierce competition and intense secrecy. It was the Soviet answer to the American Saturn V rocket, designed to carry cosmonauts beyond low Earth orbit and toward the moon. But the story of the N-1 is not just about technology, it is also about human ambition, political pressure, and tragic failure. The roots of the N-1 program trace back to the early 1960s, when Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev set a bold goal to beat the United States in the lunar race. The Kremlin demanded a heavy-lift launch vehicle capable of delivering the payload necessary for a crewed lunar mission. The existing R-7 rockets, famous for launching Sputnik and Vostok missions, were not powerful enough. A new rocket, many times larger and more complex, had to be designed from scratch. Soviet rocket design was led by two competing bureaus, Sergei Korolev's OKB-1, the nation's leading spacecraft design bureau, and Valentin Glushko's OKB-456, the preeminent rocket engine design office. Korolev, often called the chief designer, was the visionary behind many Soviet space triumphs, but internal rivalries and political intrigues complicated the development process. Unlike the American system, which had a centralized approach with Wernher von Braun and NASA's Apollo program, the Soviet approach was fractured, with competing priorities and little cross-coordination. The N-1 was Korolev's pet project, but it was also a symbol of Soviet ambition and secrecy. Its design was shrouded in layers of classified documentation, and only a handful of engineers had a clear understanding of its true capabilities and limitations. The rocket stood at over 100 meters tall and weighed nearly 3,000 tons at launch. It was designed with 30 engines firing simultaneously on its first stage, the most complex engine cluster ever attempted. This complexity was both the N-1's greatest innovation and its most fatal flaw. The Soviet leadership insisted on using many smaller engines rather than a few large ones due to limitations in engine development and political disagreements. Managing the thrust, vibration, and fuel flow of 30 engines simultaneously was a task never before attempted on this scale. Despite these challenges, Korolev and his team pushed forward, driven by the political urgency of the space race and a deeply personal dream of reaching the moon. The entire Soviet space program operated under immense pressure. Failures were suppressed, successes exaggerated, and the world rarely saw the struggles behind the scenes. The USSR's official narrative was one of near infallibility, but internally, the program was a patchwork of technical risks and mounting tension. The launch site for the N-1 was the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, a remote and sprawling complex built deep in the Kazakh steppe. Winters were brutally cold, and the launch pad often shrouded in fog and ice. Here, the N-1 rocket was assembled and prepared in near total secrecy. Workers and engineers came and went under strict supervision, and even most Soviet citizens knew little of the project's details. By late 1968, after years of design revisions, testing and delays, the N-1 was nearly ready for its first launch attempt. Korolev's unexpected death in 1966 had left a leadership vacuum, and the program suffered setbacks without its chief visionary. His successor, Vasily Mishin, inherited not only the technical challenges, but also the impossible expectations placed by the Kremlin. On a cold December morning, the countdown began for the first N1 launch. The atmosphere at Baikonur was tense but hopeful. Engineers like Ivan Petrov, a senior rocket technician, worked tirelessly around the clock. Ivan had dedicated his entire career to the N1 project, driven by pride in Soviet engineering and a secret hope to prove the world wrong. The rocket's massive engines were tested one last time. All systems appeared nominal, yet beneath the surface a cloud of doubt lingered. The engines, the most complex part of the rocket, had never been fired together on the pad. The ground crews had only fleeting moments to monitor every valve, sensor and pump. When the clock reached zero, the N1's engines ignited in a roaring blast. The massive rocket slowly lifted off, a towering inferno piercing the grey Kazakh sky. For seconds, hope soared alongside the rocket's ascent, but then disaster struck. One of the engines in the cluster failed, triggering a chain reaction. The rocket began to lose control. Alarms blared in the control centre. Within moments, the N1 exploded in a colossal fireball, obliterating the launch pad in a terrifying mushroom cloud of flame and debris. The force was so great that windows shattered kilometres away, and the shockwave rattled the nerves of every observer. The explosion marked the end of the first Soviet attempt to launch the N1, but the tragedy was only beginning. The Soviet government moved quickly to silence the disaster. No official announcements were made. The global press speculated on rumours, but the truth remained buried behind the Iron Curtain. Behind the scenes, engineers like Ivan Petrov faced a bitter reckoning. The project had lost invaluable hardware, and more painfully, it had lost hope. Yet even in defeat, the Soviet space community refused to give up. The N1 would be rebuilt. The dream of reaching the moon would persist, even if hidden from the world. The first catastrophic launch of the N1 on that cold December morning in 1968 sent ripples throughout the Soviet space program, though the world outside barely knew it had happened. Inside the walls of Baikonur Cosmodrome and the Kremlin, it was a moment of profound shock and humiliation. For the engineers, technicians and cosmonauts who had invested years, sometimes decades in this project, the failure was a crushing blow. Yet beneath the surface, a stubborn flame of determination refused to be extinguished. Vasily Mishin, who had taken over after Sergei Korolev's untimely death, found himself in an impossible position. Korolev had been not only the chief designer, but the soul of the Soviet lunar effort, an indomitable visionary who had commanded respect and wielded influence in the highest circles of Soviet power. Mishin was talented, but lacked Korolev's charisma and political savvy. The N1 project was now his burden to bear. In the immediate aftermath of the explosion, Mishin convened a series of emergency meetings with his engineering teams. The primary failure had been traced to an engine shutdown in the first stage's cluster of 30 NK-15 engines. These engines were marvels of engineering in their own right, designed by Nikolai Kuznetsov's bureau to produce immense thrust, while being relatively lightweight and efficient, but orchestrating 30 engines firing in perfect harmony was unprecedented. The shutdown of one engine triggered a cascade of events that caused the rocket to lose control and explode. Efforts to understand the precise cause were hampered by the limited telemetry data received before the destruction. The Soviet secrecy protocols meant that outside experts could not assist openly, and even within the program, information was tightly compartmentalized. Many engineers were left frustrated by a lack of transparency and the pressure to quickly find a solution. Political pressure from Moscow was relentless. Premier Alexei Kosygin, Khrushchev, having been ousted in 1964, was eager to demonstrate Soviet technological superiority on the world stage. The Apollo program was advancing rapidly in the United States, and American successes were becoming impossible to ignore. The USSR could not afford public failure in the space race, especially not the symbolic goal of landing a man on the moon. Despite these pressures, Mishin and his team prepared for a second N1 launch. They reassembled a new rocket on the launch pad, integrating modifications intended to improve engine reliability and control systems. The stakes could not have been higher. The Soviet leadership expected success, but the engineering teams feared another disaster. The launch attempt on July 3rd, 1969, took place under heavy security and tight secrecy. Few outsiders were permitted near Baikonur, and any news was heavily censored. Inside the control center, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The same engineers who had witnessed the previous failure gathered, hoping for redemption. Once again, the engines roared to life, the ground shaking beneath the N1's immense weight. The rocket lifted off smoothly, climbing steadily into the sky. But just 20 seconds into the flight, another catastrophic failure occurred. A powerful vibration, later identified as pogo oscillation, caused damage to the fuel lines and led to a fire in the first stage. The engines began to shut down one by one. The rocket started to wobble uncontrollably, then tumbled into the ground, detonating in another massive explosion. The blast destroyed the launch complex, causing extensive damage and delaying future attempts. It was the largest non-nuclear explosion in history, leveling the pad and scattering debris for kilometers. The cost in material and morale was staggering. Once again, the Soviet government enforced strict silence, burying the incident deep within classified archives. For the engineers and cosmonauts, the repeated failures were more than technical problems, they were deeply personal tragedies. Ivan Petrov, a senior engineer who had worked tirelessly on the rocket's guidance systems, recalled the weight of despair among his colleagues. "We felt like we were fighting against impossible odds," he said years later. "Every failure felt like a personal defeat, but we also knew the importance of our work. It was bigger than ourselves." Meanwhile, cosmonaut training continued in parallel with the rocket development. The Soviet Space Agency was preparing its lunar crew for missions that still seemed tantalizingly close, yet remained perilously out of reach. Cosmonauts like Vladimir Kuznetsov endured grueling simulations and physical training, honing their skills for a journey that was never guaranteed. Political leaders watched anxiously as American astronauts prepared for their own lunar landing. The Apollo 11 mission, with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, approached its historic launch in July 1969, just days after the N1's second failed launch. When Armstrong's "one small step for man" echoed across the world, the Soviet Union's silence was deafening. Inside Baikonur, the defeat was felt keenly. The Soviet dream of beating the United States to the moon had slipped away in a cloud of smoke and fire, yet the N1 program was not yet over. Over the next 2 years, engineers sought to address the technical flaws. Among the most critical issues was the cluster of 30 engines. Unlike the American Saturn V's 5 massive engines, the N1's design had required multiple smaller engines due to limitations in Soviet engine technology and internal political rivalries between engine design bureaus. This choice complicated the rocket's control systems, increasing the risk of engine failure or destructive vibrations. In addition to technical challenges, funding and resources became strained. The Soviet economy faced growing difficulties, and space exploration was expensive. Internal debates raged over whether to continue investing in the N1 or shift focus to other projects such as unmanned missions or space stations. Despite these obstacles, the Kremlin maintained an official commitment to the lunar program, though it became clear that the Soviet Union was falling behind. Mission's team worked feverishly to redesign the rocket systems, improve quality control, and enhance testing protocols. The third N1 launch attempt finally came on June 27th, 1971. Once more, the rocket thundered into the sky, engines burning bright in a fiery ascent. However, at 12 seconds into flight, another engine failure occurred. The rocket started to veer off course, and the control systems triggered an automatic shutdown. In a desperate attempt to save the vehicle, the engines were cut off, but the rocket had already become unstable. Unlike previous attempts, this launch did not end in an explosion, but it was still a failure. The rocket crashed down, a tragic reminder of how elusive the Soviet lunar goal had become. After this third failure, the Soviet leadership faced a difficult decision. The public was unaware of the disasters, but internally, confidence in the N1 program was eroding. Many engineers called for a change in direction, suggesting investments in alternative heavy-lift rockets or abandoning the lunar landing effort altogether. The program's decline was accelerated by a significant political shift. Leonid Brezhnev, who had come to power in 1964, prioritized détente with the United States and military modernization over space exploration. The ideological urgency of the lunar race faded in the face of economic realities and changing strategic priorities. For many engineers and cosmonauts, the end of the N1 program was heartbreaking. Ivan Petrov, who had survived the initial launch disasters and continued working on the project, watched helplessly as funding was cut and the rocket was mothballed. The dream that had driven him through years of hardship was now all but dead. The final N1 launch attempt, the fourth and last, occurred on November 23, 1972. This launch was the most ambitious yet, featuring improved engines and updated control systems. The rocket lifted off with great promise, but seconds into the flight, a catastrophic failure occurred again. The rocket veered wildly and crashed in a massive explosion, sealing the fate of the N1. After this last disaster, the Soviet government officially cancelled the N1 program. The space race was over and the Soviet Union quietly shifted its focus to space stations, satellites, and robotic exploration. The failures of the N1 program were rarely spoken about in public, relegated to classified reports and whispered conversations among veterans of the program. Despite the failures, the N1 remains a powerful symbol of ambition and tragedy. The rocket was an engineering marvel, attempting feats that pushed the boundaries of technology at the time. Its colossal scale, the audacity of using dozens of engines in concert, and the courage of the teams involved stand as a testament to human determination. Decades later, the truth about the N1 program gradually emerged. In post-Soviet Russia, archives were opened and veterans shared their stories. Ivan Petrov's granddaughter, Elena, discovered her grandfather's hidden journals filled with sketches, calculations, and personal reflections on the project's trials and hopes. Elena's journey into the past uncovered not only technical details but also the human cost of the program. Lives devoted to a dream that burned brightly, then was snuffed out by fire and silence. She met survivors who remembered the nights spent waiting for news, the crushing disappointment, and the stubborn hope that someday humanity's longing for the stars would be realised. The lost dream of the N1 serves as a sombre reminder of the risks and sacrifices inherent in exploration. The rocket story is one of brilliance and failure, secrecy and hope, a chapter in the saga of humanity's quest to reach beyond its home planet. After the final explosion on November 23, 1972, the Soviet lunar program was effectively dead. The Kremlin's lofty ambitions to claim the moon first had been shattered not just by technical failures, but by the harsh realities of economics and shifting political winds. Publicly, the Soviet Union maintained its image of scientific prowess while quietly shelving the colossal N1 rocket and all related lunar ambitions. Within the design bureaus and cosmonaut training centres, the mood was sombre but resolute. The engineers who had poured their lives into the N1 project were reassigned to other programs. Mishin himself was replaced by Valentin Glushko, a rival engine designer whose approach would emphasise fewer, larger engines in future rockets, abandoning the problematic cluster design of the N1. Though the lunar race was lost, the Soviet Union refocused on space stations like Salyut and Mir, pioneering long-duration human spaceflight and orbital technologies that would prove invaluable in the decades to come. Unmanned probes explored Venus, Mars and beyond, showcasing Soviet expertise in robotic space exploration. Yet the N1 lingered as a ghost in the shadows, its failures censored, its existence unknown to the wider world for many years. For those who had been part of the program, the memories were bittersweet. It was a story of ambition unfulfilled, of dreams eclipsed by fire and silence. Decades later, as the Soviet Union dissolved and archives slowly opened, the story of the N1 began to emerge from obscurity. Historians and space enthusiasts pieced together fragments from declassified documents, interviews, and memoirs. One of the most poignant rediscoveries was the personal journey of Elena Petrov, granddaughter of Ivan Petrov, the senior engineer who had witnessed every launch, every failure, every heartbreaking setback. Elena, a young historian with a passion for space exploration, stumbled upon her grandfather's journals while sorting through his belongings after his passing. The leather-bound volumes were filled with meticulous notes, diagrams and sketches detailing the N1's design and the tragic launches. More importantly, they contained personal reflections, letters to his family, diary entries revealing his doubts, hopes, and the emotional toll of the program. Driven by a desire to honour her grandfather's legacy, Elena embarked on a quest to understand the true story of the N1. She travelled to Baikonur Cosmodrome, now a museum of Soviet space history, and met surviving engineers, cosmonauts, and officials who shared their recollections. Their stories painted a complex picture, a tale of extraordinary ingenuity constrained by bureaucracy, rivalry, and secrecy, a struggle for technological mastery under intense political pressure, and a human saga of perseverance amid repeated failure. Elena's research culminated in a comprehensive documentary and book, shedding light on the forgotten Soviet giant. The N-1 rocket, once a symbol of Soviet failure, was reappraised as a monumental achievement of engineering and determination, a testament to the courage of those who dared to reach for the moon despite overwhelming odds. The legacy of the N1 continues to inspire. It serves as a reminder that great exploration carries great risk and that progress is often built on the shoulders of those who confront failure with resilience. The Soviet lunar program, though ultimately unsuccessful, contributed valuable knowledge, advanced rocket technology, and exemplified a national will to explore beyond Earth's boundaries. Today, Russia's space efforts build on this foundation, seeking new frontiers in collaboration with international partners. Meanwhile, the story of the N1 stands as a powerful chapter in humanity's ongoing journey to the stars, an echo of dreams once lost, now remembered. The N1 rocket was an engineering marvel and a source of constant frustration for the Soviet space program. Conceived in the early 1960s, the N1 was intended to rival the American Saturn V rocket, the towering vehicle that would eventually carry Apollo astronauts to the moon. But unlike the Saturn V's three massive engines in its first stage, the N1 employed a radically different approach. 30 smaller engines clustered together in the first stage alone. This decision was born out of necessity and political rivalry. The N1's chief designer, Sergei Korolev, had died unexpectedly in 1966, leaving the program in the hands of his successor, Vladimir Mishin. Mishin inherited Korolev's vision, but faced immense challenges. The Soviet rocket industry lacked engines as powerful as those in the West, so engineers chose to cluster many smaller engines to achieve the needed thrust. However, coordinating 30 engines to work perfectly in unison was a daunting technical challenge. Each engine had to ignite flawlessly and maintain stable operation under extreme conditions. The rocket's guidance systems had to manage the vibrations and oscillations created by the engine cluster, which frequently caused destructive resonances. The complexity was compounded by the Soviets' insistence on secrecy and rapid development. Unlike the American program, which conducted extensive test firings and incremental development, the N1's engines were never tested in full configuration on the ground. This led to unforeseen problems during launch attempts. In October 1969, the first N1 test flight, designated 3L, ended in disaster. Just moments after liftoff, one engine failed, causing a chain reaction that triggered the destruction of the rocket. The blast destroyed the launch pad, setting back the program by months. Despite this catastrophic failure, Mishin and his team pressed on. Driven by political pressure from Moscow, the Soviet leadership demanded results, eager to claim the moon before the Americans. The weight of these expectations rested heavily on the shoulders of the engineers and cosmonauts involved. The second launch in July 1971, designated 5L, also ended in failure. This time, a fire broke out in the first stage engines, forcing an automatic shutdown that sent the rocket crashing back to the pad. The damage was extensive, and public speculation about the N1 grew. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere was tense. Mishin faced criticism from superiors, and internal conflicts plagued the program. Some engineers believed the clustered engine approach was doomed, advocating for a redesign with fewer, more powerful engines, but time and resources were limited. The third launch attempt, 6L, in June 1972, showed initial promise, but ultimately suffered a catastrophic failure shortly after liftoff. The rocket tumbled out of control, disintegrating in a massive explosion that lit up the night sky. Each failure was a blow not only to Soviet prestige, but to the morale of those who worked tirelessly on the program. Ivan Petrov, the lead engineer, documented these struggles in his journal, describing long nights troubleshooting engine malfunctions, heated debates among design teams, and the crushing disappointment of watching their creation fall apart. The fourth and final N1 launch in November 1972, designated 7L, was the culmination of years of effort and hope. Preparations were meticulous, every subsystem was double-checked, and the launch team held their breath as the countdown began. When the engines ignited, the rocket rose powerfully, but just 70 seconds into flight, a severe failure occurred. A loose fuel line led to a fire that rapidly spread, causing multiple engines to shut down. The rocket lost control and exploded spectacularly, destroying the launch pad and scattering debris over a wide area. The devastation was immense, both physically and psychologically. The program was immediately halted. A mission was removed from leadership. Valentin Glushko took over, redirecting Soviet rocket development toward more reliable designs like the Energia launch vehicle. Despite the technical setbacks, the N1 program pushed the boundaries of what was possible in rocketry. Its innovations in engine clustering, control systems, and materials informed later projects. Many engineers who cut their teeth on the N1 went on to contribute to space station technologies and interplanetary probes. The political context of the N1's development cannot be overstated. The Cold War rivalry with the United States fueled urgency and secrecy, often at the expense of thorough testing and collaboration. Soviet leadership's desire to outpace America in space exploration led to compressed timelines and enormous pressure on engineers and cosmonauts. Cosmonauts who trained for lunar missions lived in a state of limbo as the N1's failures mounted. They underwent grueling physical and psychological preparation, only to see their chances to fly slip away. Vladimir Kuznetsov, the mission commander on the ill-fated 7L launch, never got to leave Earth's orbit. In private conversations years later, he expressed mixed feelings of pride in their efforts and frustration at the program's demise. Amid this technical and political turmoil, the human element of the N1 story shines through most poignantly in the personal writings of those involved. Ivan Petrov's journals reveal the emotional toll of the program, the excitement of early successes, the crushing despair of failures, and the fragile hope that sustained them. His granddaughter, Elena, felt this humanity deeply as she read his words decades later. Through her interviews with surviving engineers and cosmonauts, she pieced together a narrative not only of rockets and explosions, but of dreams and determination. The N1 was more than a machine. It was a symbol of a nation's aspiration to conquer the stars. Her research uncovered chilling details about the government's attempts to suppress news of the failures. Launch accidents were quickly covered up, with official reports downplaying the scale of the disasters. Engineers faced intense scrutiny and blame, yet few received public recognition for their work. Elena's work helped bring this hidden chapter of space history into the light. Her documentary, featuring archival footage, interviews, and personal testimonies, received international acclaim. It painted a balanced portrait of the N1 program, not just as a series of failures, but as an epic saga of innovation and resilience under extraordinary pressure. Today, the N1 stands as a testament to human ambition and the costs of exploration. Its story resonates beyond the borders of the former Soviet Union, reminding us that the path to the moon and beyond is paved with risk, sacrifice, and the unyielding spirit of those who dare to dream. The aftermath of the final N1 launch failure in November 1972 marked a turning point not only for the Soviet space program, but for the Cold War space race itself. As the enormous fireball consumed the launch pad, the reality sank in. The Soviet Union's dream of sending cosmonauts to the moon on the N1 rocket was over. The scale of the explosion was unlike anything seen before. The 7L rocket, standing over 100 meters tall and weighing nearly 3,000 tons, detonated with such force that it obliterated the launch complex at Site 110 at Baikonur Cosmodrome. This was not merely a setback, it was a catastrophe of monumental proportions. The blast sent debris raining down across the steppe, damaging facilities and knocking out critical infrastructure. The shockwave shattered windows in nearby buildings and could be felt tens of kilometers away. Engineers, technicians, and emergency crews rushed to assess the damage and recover what they could. For weeks, Baikonur was a chaotic scene of cleanup and reconstruction, but the damage to the program was irreversible. The N1 program was officially cancelled shortly thereafter, and the Soviet government moved swiftly to bury the failure deep within classified archives. Valentin Glushko, a prominent rocket engine designer and rival to the late Sergei Korolev, was appointed to lead the future of Soviet heavy-lift launch vehicles. Under Glushko's guidance, development shifted toward the Energia rocket, which used a fundamentally different approach to propulsion and benefited from lessons learned in the failures of the N1. For the engineers who had poured their lives into the N1, the cancellation was a bitter blow. Ivan Petrov's journal entries from this period reveal a mixture of disbelief, sorrow, and lingering hope. All those years, all that effort, he wrote, gone in an instant of flame and smoke, but the dream of the stars does not die with a single rocket. In the wake of the program's termination, many engineers were reassigned to other projects, including the development of space stations like Salyut and Mir, or interplanetary missions such as the Mars and Venus probes. While the N1 was never successful, its technical innovations informed these later endeavours. Cosmonauts who trained for the lunar missions faced uncertain futures. The rigorous training regime, which included simulated lunar landings and deep space navigation, was abruptly halted. Many were reassigned to other missions or moved into training roles. Vladimir Kuznetsov, the would-be commander of the N1's moonbound crew, retired from active flight duties and spent the rest of his career mentoring younger cosmonauts. Publicly, the Soviet government maintained silence on the N1's failures, choosing instead to focus on other successes. The Soviet robotic missions to the moon and planets, as well as the launch of pioneering space stations, became the face of Soviet space achievement during the 1970s and 1980s. Yet, behind the official narratives, the story of the N1 persisted in hushed conversations, private diaries, and classified documents. For decades, the truth about the catastrophic launches remained tightly guarded, fueling speculation in the West about the true extent of Soviet space capabilities and ambitions in present-day Russia. Historians and researchers like Elena Petrov have worked to bring this hidden history to light. Elena's discovery of her grandfather Ivan's journal provided a unique personal window into the emotional and technical challenges faced by those who worked on the N1. Her painstaking archival research uncovered classified reports, technical blueprints, and first-hand testimonies that corroborated Ivan's accounts. Among the documents were detailed failure analyses of each N1 launch, revealing a pattern of engine malfunctions, guidance system errors, and structural weaknesses. One particularly chilling report described the final moments of the 7L launch. It detailed how a loose fuel line in the first stage allowed kerosene to leak into the engine compartment, igniting a catastrophic fire that caused rapid loss of thrust and eventual disintegration of the rocket. The launch control team was powerless to intervene once the failure began, and the destruction was complete within seconds. Elena's interviews with surviving engineers revealed the immense pressure they had been under. The political demands to beat the Americans to the moon created an environment where corners were sometimes cut and failures were concealed. "We knew the risks," one engineer recalled, "but the expectation was to succeed no matter what. Failure was not an option they were willing to accept." The human cost was profound. Many engineers worked 18-hour days, sacrificing family and health for the program. The stress and secrecy fostered internal rivalries and mistrust. Some engineers were scapegoated for failures, while others left the program in frustration. Despite these hardships, the engineers shared a profound pride in their work. They saw themselves as pioneers pushing the boundaries of technology and human capability. The N1's failures did not diminish their commitment to exploration, but rather deepened their resolve to learn and improve. The legacy of the N1 program is complex. On one hand, it represents a tragic chapter marked by technical failures and lost opportunities. On the other, it stands as a testament to human ingenuity and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to dream beyond the Earth. In recent years, museums and exhibitions have begun to showcase the history of the N1. Restored artifacts, engine components, and detailed models help educate the public about the scale and ambition of the Soviet lunar program. These exhibits highlight the remarkable engineering feats achieved despite the challenges. Elena's documentary further brought international attention to the N1 story. It combined rare archival footage, personal narratives, and expert commentary to provide a comprehensive and balanced view of the program. Audiences worldwide were captivated by the human drama behind the cold steel of the rocket. The N1's influence extends beyond history. Modern space programs, including Russia's current lunar ambitions and emerging private ventures, draw lessons from the program's successes and failures. The clustering of engines, advanced guidance systems, and materials research pioneered during the N1 era continue to inform rocket design today. Elena reflected on her grandfather's final words in his journal: "The dream is not dead, it waits in the ashes." This sentiment encapsulates the enduring spirit of exploration that transcends any single program or nation. As humanity sets its sights once again on the moon, Mars, and beyond, the story of the N1 serves as a reminder of the challenges inherent in reaching for the stars. It honours the sacrifices of those who came before and inspires future generations to persevere despite adversity. The lost stream of the N1 may have been consumed in fire, but its embers continue to glow, lighting the path forward for all who dare to follow. And that was the untold tragedy of the N1 rocket, a story buried in secrecy only to resurface decades later as a haunting reminder of just how far humanity is willing to go to reach the stars. Thank you so much for watching. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Next Friday, we're diving into another mind-blowing true event: the night the Great Molasses Flood swallowed an American city. Yes, a 15-foot wall of sticky, boiling molasses rushing through the streets of Boston in 1919, killing and destroying everything in its path. It sounds unbelievable, but it's absolutely real. And remember, I post new videos every Friday, so hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. In the meantime, check out my shorts. There are already more than 1,000 waiting for you, packed with fascinating facts, forgotten history, and stories you won't believe are true. Until next time, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next video.